Greetings. Today, I'm going to show you some documents that tell a story. A few months ago, I was cleaning out some old boxes in our storage locker and discovered some fascinating historical documents saved by my late husband, Julian. Julian had told me many stories about his life as a refugee, but it was quite a different experience to see tangible proof that actually validated them. Seeing the documents on the screen is not quite as exciting as being able to touch them and to imagine their journey from country to country. But nonetheless, I hope you will find them interesting. To help you understand the contents of the documents, I need to give you a little background. Julian was born in 1925 in Lvov, a large cosmopolitan city in eastern Poland. It is now Lviv, Ukraine. His family were well-to-do assimilated Jews. When Germany attacked Poland on September 1, 1939, bombs immediately began to drop on Lvov. The house of one of Julian's aunts was completely destroyed. His family quickly made the decision to leave the country. Many people were fleeing east to Russia, but his family decided to go south toward Romania. This turned out to be a very good decision because many people who went to Russia ended up being deported to Siberia. His mother's sister and her husband also decided to leave. Both the uncle and Julian's father had cars. The only problem was that the army was requisitioning all vehicles for the military, and Julian's father's car was confiscated. The uncle had better luck. He was friendly with the commander of the local garrison, who had long admired the fancy car the uncle owned. The uncle asked the commander for permission to take the car to the border, promising to have the driver then return it. The commander agreed if the uncle would trade cars with him. The uncle was only too happy to do so. Since Julian's family of 4 had lost their own means of escape, the aunt and uncle agreed to take them along in their car. So now they had the means to escape. What should they take with them, aside from the obvious, money and jewelry? Julian's older sister, Janine, took a small photo album, which proved to be a priceless souvenir because it contained pictures of their pre-war life. Julian and Janine both decided to take a few bars of chocolate in their suitcases. What about documents? What might be useful? Here are some of the things they decided to take. The oldest document I found in the collection was the birth record of Julian's father, Joseph, born in April 1883. Why did he carry it with him? If he tried to get a job in a new country, he might need to prove his age and place of birth. Another old document certifies that Joseph had been a teacher of Polish and Russian from 1905 to 1908. In later years, he became a successful businessman, but this shows that he started out as a teacher, and this record might prove useful. This is the marriage record of Julian's parents in 1922. After all, they might need proof that they were legally married. This is the birth record of Julian, who was age 14 when the family left Poland. It not only shows his birth date, it also shows the date of his bris, 8 days later. This is Julian's identity card as a student. Evidently, even young students had to have an identity card when wandering around the city. This document must have been packed by Julian himself. I don't think a record of the badges he earned in a rifle club was really an important document to carry when fleeing one's country, but a 14-year-old might have thought so. On the other hand, his grades might be important if he wanted to get into a good school. But one example would surely have been enough. Instead, there were 6 such documents, one for each semester of his high school, and there were 6 more for his sister. Obviously, the family placed great importance on education. This is the passport of the father. What I found interesting is that on one of the pages, it showed that in the early 1930s, while on business trips to Warsaw, the father stayed several times at Hotel Europejski. 60 years later, in the 1990s, Julian and I traveled many times to Warsaw, and by chance, Hotel Europejski was one of our favorite places to stay. The next documents were crucial for the family's survival. According to Julian's memoir, in exchange for the uncle's car, the commander gave the uncle a Buick. When Julian's father's car was confiscated and the uncle agreed to take their family with him, it was fortunate that they had a large car equipped with jump seats where the children could sit. But was it really an American Buick in 1939 Poland? Well, this document is the proof. It shows that a new Buick was delivered to the uncle on September 2nd, 1939. This is the permit needed to take a car and passengers to the Romanian border. The uncle was given a supposedly ironclad document saying that the Buick was not needed by the military and should not be confiscated. Without this small piece of paper, the 2 families would not have been able to escape. They left Lvov on September 10th, 1939, and stopped along the way in the city of Stanisławów to say goodbye to some relatives and to stay overnight. As they left Stanisławów the next morning, they were stopped by the military police, who examined their documents and told them that their ironclad permit was not valid in Stanisławów, and the soldiers demanded the surrender of the car. You can imagine their dismay. With a lot of pleading, they were finally allowed to take the car to a city near the border, on the condition that the driver immediately surrender the car to the Stanisławów military and not take it back to Lvov. This document attests to the fact that the car was to be surrendered. You might note that this document says the car was a Chevrolet. I guess to the soldiers, all American cars looked alike. As they arrived near the border with Romania, they heard that the Russians were about to enter Lvov. Some refugees decided to go back home as they thought the Russians had come to save them. Little did they know that the Russians had made a secret agreement with the Germans to divide Poland, and the Russians planned to take control of the eastern half, which included Lvov. When they arrived at the border, they observed that many of the vehicles belonged to Polish government officials. The Bank of Poland was there, with school buses containing all of Poland's gold. Julian's father said they must know what they were doing, and wisely the family decided not to return to their home in Poland. Poland had collapsed very quickly, and the Polish officials were fleeing to form a government in exile, first in France and then in England. The aunt and uncle had visas and were allowed to cross into Romania, but Julian's family did not have visas and they were stopped. They stayed the night in the border town, spent the following day rushing around getting knapsacks so they could carry all their belongings themselves. They had to abandon some of their suitcases. That night, a smuggler took them to the border. The father then bribed a guard who let them walk across the bridge between Poland and Romania. When they got to the Romanian side, however, the border guard there refused to let them enter. The father took off his fancy wristwatch and dangled it in front of the guard. The guard grabbed it and disappeared, clearing the way for them to continue on. Once inside Romania, they found lodging, and a day or so later, they went to the Polish consulate in Czerniowce and got temporary passports. The dates on these documents allowed me to track their journey. After a few days in Czerniowce, they went to the capital city of Bucharest, where they were reunited with the aunt and uncle. They lived for 6 months in a small hotel in one room, sometimes illegally cooking on a hot plate. Julian and his sister had studied French in Lvov, so they were quickly enrolled in a French school. A Romanian school would have been beyond their capabilities. After a couple months, a lot more Polish refugees arrived in Romania, and a Polish refugee high school was formed. Julian got good in most subjects, but very good in mathematics, his favorite subject. While in Romania, the parents spent their days rushing from one consulate to another, trying to find a country that would accept them, since the Germans were gradually having more and more influence in Romania. After a while, the family managed to get visas to France, but soon France was becoming unsafe. Palestine, then a British mandate, was not too eager to allow Jews to enter. However, the father had brought 4 bars of gold with him, and that qualified them for a very precious capitalist visa to Palestine. Thus, in March 1940, they took a boat from Constanza on the Black Sea to Haifa, Palestine. Julian marveled that in the midst of the raging war in Europe, they stopped off in Athens and Istanbul and saw the sights as if they were ordinary tourists. As Romania became more dangerous, other Polish refugees began arriving in Palestine. The Polish high school, formerly in Bucharest, was reestablished in Tel Aviv, where Julian's family had settled. About 1/3 of the students were Jewish. And here is an almost identical format for the report of grades in the Polish high school in Tel Aviv. In addition to attending the Polish high school in Tel Aviv, Julian took English lessons at the British Institute in Jaffa, and then took an exam that qualified him to enter a British university. This document proved to be very useful later on. In 1942, at age 17, he graduated from the Polish Refugee High School in Tel Aviv. During the time that Julian lived in Palestine, a free Polish army was formed in Siberia and came through the Middle East. At age 18, like many of his fellow students, he decided to join what became known as the Anders Army. It was a Polish army, but under the command of the British Eighth Army. This unassuming document testifies to his enlistment in May 1943. He first trained in tanks in the desert in Egypt, not far from the pyramids, which he visited. But he didn't like the tanks. Climbing in and out of them was very difficult, and he said he was black and blue all over. Fortunately, he was soon accepted at the anti-aircraft officer school in Gadara, Palestine. He was then shipped to southern Italy to fight the Germans, who were entrenched there. His job was to help operate an anti-aircraft gun to support the infantry. This is his driving license. In later years, when people complained about his driving, he explained to them that he learned to drive a tank before he learned to drive a car. This is a document that I found amazing. It lists every single item of clothing, gear, and weapons that he was issued. Not only a uniform and underwear and PJs, but also a toothbrush, a clothing brush, and a shoe brush. The list also included his rifle, complete with serial number, and the fact that he had been issued 50 rounds of ammunition. Before he went into the army, Julian was told that soldiers had a lot of downtime, even during a war, and was advised to bring some books with him. Since he was fighting in Italy, he wanted to learn Italian. He aimed high and brought a copy of Dante's Inferno and a Polish-Italian dictionary. This copy is a little battered, but it did survive. He also carried the Bible in Polish, the history of England, and the decline and fall of the Roman Empire. The war was not yet over in March 1945, and the soldiers had yet to fight the Battle of Bologna. But here they are on leave visiting the Vatican because Rome had already been liberated. Julian is in the front row, just behind the right-hand corner of the monument. During his time of combat, soldiers were asked not to keep any diaries or letters that might inform the enemy of their whereabouts. Thus, I found no documents from that period. However, Julian did save some artifacts. One was his dog tags, which showed his name and the fact that he was Jewish. Thus, if he were killed in battle, he might get a Jewish burial. He also saved his helmet and his sleeping sack. He gave talks at the schools of all of our 8 grandchildren, and the students, especially the boys, all loved to try on the helmet. The army didn't supply everything, so his mother sewed him a document bag and a money belt. She also made him a small pillow, which he carried everywhere, but that was in such bad shape, we threw it out a long time ago. This is a picture of a display we had done to show his medals. The top 3 were given by the Polish government in exile, while the bottom 3 were awarded by the British government. The most important for Julian was the Cross of Monte Cassino in the upper right-hand corner, which is from their most famous battle. The war was over in May 1945. 1 month later, with no battle to fight, Julian's unit had already started a literary magazine, much like the one we have here. When I opened it, I found a short article written by none other than J. Bussgang, and I promptly put it into Google Translate. It was a sweet story entitled Love and Goodbye. Some of the soldiers had become friends with a family in the village. The family had homemade wine, and the soldiers had beef, soap, cigarettes, and chocolate. But after a while, their unit moved on, and they all had to say goodbye to their new friends. When the war was over and the soldiers were still in Italy, they were allowed to attend Italian universities. So Julian did his first year of engineering in Torino. Luckily, by then, he knew Italian fairly well. In March of 1946, Julian was given permission to travel to Genoa, where he had an appointment with the American consul to apply for a student visa to the US. The consul was impressed that he had been admitted to USC and asked him, "Do you want to stay in the United States?" He replied, "Yes, of course." That was the wrong answer. The consul told him he could not give him a student visa. He would have to apply for an immigrant visa, which would indeed take some time. He finished off his year at the Politecnico very well, getting quite good grades, even though his Italian had been self-taught. Then his unit was moved to England, since they were still under British command. Most of the Polish soldiers did not want to go back to Poland, since it was now under communist control. So the British gave them stipends similar to the GI Bill of Rights, and they were allowed to continue their education in England. The fact that Julian had already passed the University of London matriculation exam enabled him to start school right away. In 1948, in England, he was issued a travel document for stateless persons, and he finally got his visa to immigrate to the US. The British gave him free passage to the US. They were quite happy to do this for the Polish soldiers, as they then had no more responsibility for them. Julian left England for the US in February 1949. His parents and sister had left a month earlier and settled in New York. His ship landed in Boston, so he then took a train to New York to join them. Note that the trip from Liverpool to Boston took 13 days. These are his discharge papers. He was officially still in the Army until the day before he landed in the United States, which was in February of 1949. He took his final exam for the bachelor's degree in June 1949, when already in the United States. The reason was that the US consulate in London refused to extend his visa so he could stay a few more months and take the exam in England with his class. He was told that if he remained, he would lose his visa and have to start all over again, a 5-year wait. Fortunately, the University of London arranged for him to take the exam in New York, supervised by Columbia University. 5 years later, after getting a master's at MIT and being well on his way to a PhD at Harvard, Julian became an American citizen. As you can see, Julian had a very interesting life. Some of you have already read his memoir, which is in the Newbridge Library on the resident author shelf. Newbridge is where I live now. And if you want to know about his later life, you can read his Wikipedia page on the internet. I, of course, have heard his stories many times, but it was a thrill for me to find these documents that validate his recollections. The U.S. Holocaust Museum was very interested in all the documents because they do not have much material on people with experiences like Julian's. So they came to Newbridge in December and packed them up and took them to Washington. They will thus be well preserved and made available for research. And that is the end of my talk. Thank you very much for listening.